Welcome back. Aaron Berkowitz here with the JLJ. I'm with Marina Rubin, who was born in Vinnytsia, Ukraine, and immigrated to the United States in 1989. She's an associate editor of Mudfish, Tribeca's literary and art magazine, and a 2013 recipient of Cogeco Blueprint Fellowship. She's the author of Stealing Cherries and the new short story collection Knockout Beauty and Other Afflictions, which has received an honorable mention for the 2020 Miami Book Fair Emerging Writer Fellowship. Welcome, Marina. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Aaron.
Okay, so we were talking a little bit before, and you're ready for the first question, I think, which is why this book and why now?
You know, it's such a diabolical question because in the world of publishing, that question, it has so many other undertones. Because why now? Why now? It took me 10 years to write this and get it out. So my last book, Stealing Cherries, came out in 2013. So that's 10 years. Took me 5 years to write this new book, Knockout Beauty. Then it took me an additional 4 years to get the right publisher. I mean, I've had different offers, but nothing was really matching, and the publishers didn't understand my vision, or they have wild ideas. Oh, we want to break up your book into 3, or something like that. So I was holding out, and I was waiting for the right publisher. And then when the right publisher finally appeared, Crow's Nest Books, it also took an additional, year and a half to get the book published and out in bookstores. And I had a huge sold out book launch in New York City at the UJA. I don't know. Are you in New York City, by the way?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. At the UJA hosted the event, and it was really worth the wait. So getting back to your question, why now? That's how the publishing gods had decided. But in reality, this book is like a love letter to women. And I feel like there's not a lot of literature coming in today about Jewish women, or, they are way too focused on religion as opposed to modern Jewish women, in their 30s and their 40s, kind of dealing with relationships, with careers, family, identity. And I thought this was the right time for it because I just didn't see anything else like that on the market. I mean, the time of Sex in the City kind of like behind us by about 15 years. And ironically, I think this was the right time to get the book out.
So there was 3 questions that popped in my mind as you're speaking, and they're in different sort of places. But let's start with the idea of vision. So you said your vision was lining up in the past. So talk to me about that vision. What's the vision sort of for the book, or what was sort of the impetus behind the structure? Or obviously you're talking about women, Jewish women, perhaps in a less religious context, but is there something else to that vision that just didn't seem to translate in the early stages?
In my previous book, I focused on immigration. I'm from Ukraine, as you had mentioned in my biography. I focused on the experience of, immigrating from former Soviet Union. I'm from Ukraine. Into United States, integrating into the American culture, some of the hardships of first years of assimilating into an American culture, understanding it, and also finding the Jewish identity. And once that book came out, I felt like I needed to move forward. I can't write about immigration all the time. I need to address what comes next. We're here. Let's talk about what happens to immigrants who had assimilated, who are now, career girls, or, or not necessarily people who had found their Jewish faith, and so. But the reason for the focus of women is, it's not just women, there's a female protagonist in every story, but, women don't live in a vacuum. There are men who love them, hate them, don't understand them too much. And so I wanted to explore the lives of immigrants, but no longer through that prism of immigration. We've assimilated, we're here. What happens next? Careers, families, journeys, travel, and still that search for the essential self, that you're no longer an immigrant, but you're not someone who was born in the United States. So you're trying to find that little niche, that space where you belong.
And what's it like to, I think when we think of writers, oftentimes we think of the difficulties it is to get published and get your work out there. So you're mentioning the idea of turning down things or having opportunities, but perhaps waiting for a better one. So talk to me about sort of that mindset when it comes to publishing your work, because I think that most people sort of, I don't want to say leap at the first opportunity, but are definitely tempted to do so because of the difficulties it is, in finding such, when we talk about the publishing world, and the difficulties therein, people sort of, when they get an opportunity, they take it. So talk to me about sort of why you were confident, or sort of the thought process behind turning things down.
It's kind of funny. I get a lot of, questions. Oh, Marina, in a nutshell, can you give me an idea how I can get my book published? And I'm like, in a nutshell, this is years and years. And it's like the same thing as, how do I make it big in Hollywood? In like a nutshell. This is decades and decades of research and writing out query letters and sending to everyone on the planet, and getting rejected. Probably, I've never seen that much rejection, but I kept going and I kept going. I probably sent my query letters to the same agents and the same publishers 3-4 times and received those rejections, but it didn't matter because I knew that eventually the right publisher will pick me up. And I did get offers. It wasn't like, it was all rejection. I did get offers, but we just didn't align on the vision. I don't know, let's say I got a very interesting offer, and I had this long Zoom call with the publisher, and they were like, we really love your book, we want to give you an offer. The only thing is, can you delete all the sex scenes? And I was like, what did you like about my book? Like, what is it that you liked about it? Because like, I don't know, can I say this on this Zoom?
Yeah.
Are you gonna cut this out?
No.
I mean, it's all a part of the experience. I'm not saying that my book is X-rated. That's not the case. But I was like, or another offer where they wanted to divide my book into 3. Why? It's 16, 17 short stories. Why divide them into 3? And like, what, publish them as pamphlets? Or it was just silly. And then some of the publishers were like aligned with my vision, but they were just too small, or they didn't have the global distribution that I wanted, or they didn't have a nice website, or they were bordering on vanity publishing. And because I've already had a pretty good book in 2013 that was on the list of like best, that got an honorable mention on the list of best books of 2014, I thought I could like hold out a little bit and wait for the right publisher. And the right publisher did show up. This publisher, Crow's Nest Books, is out of Chicago. They have global distribution through University of Toronto Press. And the funny thing is, when I was having an initial Zoom with them, I was on video with 2 kind of macho guys, and we're like, we love chick fiction. And I was like, you like women's fiction? It was very odd because, in my vision, I thought that, a female minority-owned publisher would pick me, as opposed to these 2 very macho men. And I was like, you know what? It's kind of interesting because my book is not. Maybe my book is not women's fiction. Maybe it's relatable to everybody. And now I get a lot of reviews, and I think there's like an equal market of readers with men and women. Although they look at it differently. It's kind of funny. Men always tell me, "Oh, your book is so funny," and women tell me, "Oh, your book is so sad. And I'm like, there's a part of me that thinks maybe they're reading a different book, but in reality, I know they're reading the same book. And that was one of the reasons why I thought, you know what, this book needs to be written, because if there's such a difference of opinion and perspective from the genders, then definitely this is a book that has a lot to offer to the audience.
Yeah. And so you mentioned sort of like, what do you see as the problem? Is there some sort of holdout with Jewish sort of thought and stories being published, or is it that people are expecting like Jewish to mean religious? Is it why the hesitancy to publish something that's Jewish but perhaps not religiously centered?
I think most of the Jewish publications want to publish stories or poems or whatever that are very focused on the Jewish experience in terms of the Holocaust, the immigration, embracing religion, kind of bordering on Orthodox lifestyle. But in reality, the percentage of let's say New York City, there are so many Jewish women that are not, in the synagogue every Friday night, and men for that matter. So why not speak to them? And I think the Jewish publications have an obligation to their maybe sponsors, maybe audience, I don't know, but the focus is really, we want to embrace that that really like Jewish, whether it's religion or history, or immigration, as opposed to, well, there's a life, we're living, we're working. It's now, it's 2023. Let's talk about what is happening now.
Sure.
Through the prism of Jewish identity, don't get me wrong, because all of my characters in the book are Jewish immigrants. They just not necessarily talk about it. I mean, there is a story in there where, and it's a modern story where the protagonist goes to the LGBTQ synagogue, where she meets one of her friends who is a leader in an LGBTQ Jewish movement. Well, that's very like cutting edge, like. And I thought this is a modern perspective on what is happening now.
Yeah, and something that struck me obviously is the story You Can Live with This Nose. I thought that was a very interesting sort of representation of I don't want to call it secular Judaism, but Judaism, let's say, not religious based, the idea of the Jewish nose. And I was actually thinking about it this morning a lot, in terms of all the sort of propaganda that you brought up the Holocaust stories and things, like how the nose has taken on sort of its own idea, the Jewish nose. So how do we think through that in terms of writing a story about debating whether or not a Jewish nose is something good or bad, or how it works within the cultural context we find ourselves in?
I mean, Jewish nose is a metaphor for so many more things than just a nose. You know what I mean? It's culture, it's history. Yes, it's even a little bit of Holocaust. I hate to say it because, how do they, if you weren't necessarily wearing a Jewish star in like Warsaw ghetto, but that nose would always, give you away. And there's just so much literature on that, by the way. But taking it into today's context, it's kind of funny. I was on my book tour for Stealing Cherries. I was doing quite a big presentation at the synagogue in the Hamptons. And I remember it was probably a good 200, 300 people. What do they do in the Hamptons? They go to the synagogue for a Jewish book reading. And I remember thinking, those are some really great noses in the audience. And those noses were very Jewish. And at the same time, I saw some serious plastic surgery. And that's why I wanted to kind of write this modern, cute, chic story about, you're in a synagogue, you're very Jewish, you're thinking, I should get a nose job. And that actually brings up a lot of issues. Wait a second. first of all, you're in an LGBT synagogue. That's a phenomenon on its own. You're thinking about plastic surgery because you're so in your own, you can't see past your own nose. And the lesson of that story, and also one of the main things about that story is because and this protagonist is talking about her mother, how the mother wants her to get a nose job. And it also goes back to that relationship between mothers, Jewish mothers, you know what I mean? And at the end, the point of this entire story is that, you need to see past your nose and you need to look around because you're in an LGBT synagogue where people, are cutting off things that are much more important than those to live their authentic lives. And, but I think a Jewish nose is a real symbol of your identity.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And it carries a lot of history.
Yeah, it's interesting to think through the idea of authenticity and identity and how those intersect on an individual and communal level.
I want to add that the point of the story is also a little bit on assimilation. She has the Jewish nose and she's thinking of molding it into a cute little goyim nose to be more attractive. So, and I do think that Holocaust so far behind us. Obviously, we're assimilating at a new rate. I think there's a tremendous amount of out of religion, marriage, and just abandonment of religion. I do feel that.
Yeah, it's interesting to sort of see that work through the idea of how to recontextualize tradition so that it sort of keeps going, so that it survives what might be happening within the context now. So how we sort of bridge the past to the future. And I do think
but also at the same time, here I am, here she is at an LGBT synagogue. I mean, LGBT movement, LGBT rights, transgender rights, that's very cutting edge. And at the same time, here we have people who cling to religion. Isn't that interesting that, ordinary Jewish people stay away from it while people who are really transitioning into, completely kind of a, extraordinary lives are clinging to God and to faith.
Yeah, it's a very anachronistic sort of vantage point where what about sort of a transition also begs for a reacceptance of a past or the history of your people to sort of help ground whatever's happening in the modern sense. I also think it's interesting when you write, this is obviously a short story, but when you're completing this book, is it sort of like one story at a time? Is there an arc that you're working from, or how do you, this is your second book of short stories versus, let's say, a novel. So why short stories, and how do you sort of get each short story to sort of work with each other?
This is actually my fifth book because I wrote 3 books of poetry. And in those 3 books, I started writing very early. I was probably 20. So, in my first book, I was writing these really sharp, snappy haikus because that's what I thought the form for my emotions were. And then in my second book, I was writing very classic poems because they simply reflected what I wanted to say. In my third book, I started playing with shapes, I don't know, I'll give you an example. There's a poem called Hot Air Balloon, and it's written in the shape of a hot air balloon. So that's how I expressed the content. In my book of short stories, Stealing Cherries, it was all flash fiction. And it was literally written in the size of a box of 300 words, and it was all fully justified, and it literally looked like a suitcase. And the reason for that is because the book was so immigration focused. Every story that looked like a box, looked like a suitcase, which is kind of like a metaphor for you put all your belongings in a suitcase and you move to another country. For this story, what I needed to say about women, about relationships, about family, work, I wanted to write in like short stories, but there's only one story in there that is more than 25 pages. Everything else is 6, 7. There are a couple that are 2, 3 pages. I didn't really focus on like I wanted to look like that. I just wanted it to be as user friendly as possible. And then at the end, when I was editing the book with my publisher, there was definitely a theme on how we're going to configure the book, because I do believe that a book of short stories should be put into such order that it actually reads like a novel. And we worked really hard because in the beginning, we introduced this kind of struggling writer in the story Jala, and it almost opens a window into a whole new world. So here's the struggling writer. And then the next story is a longer story about this writer having a very extraordinary friendship with this Jewish character from Moscow who's very mysterious, and a man in a fedora. And then it slowly goes into relationships, into New York, You Can Live As This Knows, and then it slowly progresses into extensive travel and, like New Zealand, Bangkok. And of course, there's always that theme of women traveling. And then it progresses, well, actually before traveling, it progresses into women working, creating friendships in the workplace, dealing with Me Too movement, which is also kind of a new movement. And it's not, Me Too is very controversial, I have to say, because, obviously corporate America had embraced women, who were abused, but also, I wanted to write a story that kind of looks a little bit at the Me Too movement in a little bit of a different light, how it could be abused, how it could be used in ways that are not, protecting victims, but really in terms of manipulation, corporate maneuvering. And I thought that was interesting. So basically, I wanted to take concepts that are already defined and look at them from a different angle. And then as the book progresses, it goes into travel, and then it ends on a very important story because, the protagonist is traveling, but at the end, the whole point of the story, Scream, is that she kind of like has a spiritual awakening where she understands that God exists. So all this meandering and all this searching and searching and searching kind of comes back to, that kind of level of spirituality. And it's still not on the religious level. So this is like, she almost has proof that God exists because she finds herself in a difficult situation where she starts screaming to God that you gotta help me. And, the circumstances work out in miraculous way where she can't even believe that only God could do that. So in reality, this is definitely a spiritual book that kind of questions religion as well, but religion at a different level.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you put it in that context because, you talked about your first book being about immigration and you wanted to sort of change the view, but there is a lot here about traveling and sort of moving from place to place. So it's just interesting to see sort of you decontextualize the immigration, but that doesn't mean that travel stops per se, or movement.
I think travel is a great way to discover yourself, discover God. And, it's, for me personally, it's in the top 3 greatest things that ever existed. Even though I'm a huge New Yorker, I love everything about New York. I'm always out and about. I love, last week I was at the Gracie Mansion for a Russian heritage, heritage event with the mayor of New York, Eric Adams, and I thought, and of course the whole diaspora of New York Jewry was there, who are, of Russian descent, even though I don't want to say the word Russian right now, because that's not what I'm trying, we're living in a different time. Where am I going with this?
Just the idea of movement and travel.
Right. So I love New York just for its own diversity, and honestly, you really don't even need to travel anywhere out of New York, because New York has it all. But traveling outside the country gives you an opportunity to completely get lost, because you have no idea where you are, and quite often Wi-Fi doesn't work and you're just like, I'm gonna follow my stars. And the truth is, when you follow your stars, you just never get lost. I've never gotten lost. I mean, as much as I got lost in other countries, I always felt like I was where I belong.
Yeah, that's another theme I would say is this idea. Two themes that sort of hit me were the idea of searching and the idea of sort of missed connections. That seemed to be prevalent throughout a lot of the stories, was this idea of the protagonist is looking for something and seems to find it, but then somehow it sort of slips away, or it was never really what was anticipated in the beginning. And that sort of seemed to me like the ebb and flow of a lot of the stories was this idea of searching and then finding and then realizing you might have to go searching again.
Well, it's a theme of the eternal, first of all, immigrant. Once you're an immigrant, you are kind of an immigrant at heart, because you're always moving and you're always searching, because whether you like it or not, there is a void that you're missing from your homeland, that you're not, as much as you assimilated and you've graduated from university and you're working in corporate America and you have American friends, you're always aware that you're not at home, you're not speaking your native language, and you're not necessarily living according to the cultural norms. So that's what the searching is about. But also, going back to the theme of women, women are always searching, whether they're searching for motherhood. And motherhood is not one of the themes that I address in this book, because I couldn't come up with anything compelling to talk about in the theme of motherhood, which is probably one of the shortcomings of this book, because if you were to talk about the female experience, you need to address all the aspects. But I feel like I wanted to write about different kinds of women, the women who are searching, not the ones who are happily found and happily in families, and their mothers, and and they're in caretaker positions. I wanted to write about women who need care as opposed to are able to give care.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of split. I haven't thought of it that way, but yeah, very interesting. And the classic cliche is that people move from short stories to a novel. Now you have two short story collections. Is there ideas around a novel, or is it sort of like you see a separation? It's an interesting debate between writers. Are fiction, are short stories different than novels conceptually? Are they a completely different genre, or do you like short fiction and that's sort of where you want to stay?
I've been doing short fiction for quite a bit, and even though I'm an avid reader and I love novels, obviously I read all the time, and I admire writers who can write a good novel. Let's just say that. And for me, a symbol of a good novel is, let's say, 100 Years of Solitude, because it's grand, it's multidimensional, it's complex, and it's vivid. And I feel like I would like to write a novel like that. And unless I can write a novel of that scope, I'm just not gonna even try, because for that you need the kind of emotional organization that is just, either it comes with tremendous talent or tremendous patience, tremendous time, time. And also probably a vision, you need to be almost looking at everything as if you're God from above, and there need to be like simultaneous plots going in different places at the same time. And maybe one day when I'm wiser.
Sure. No, it is interesting to think through the idea around maybe the hubris or maybe patient. I don't know. When you talk about like Dickens writing a novel, he was meticulous in his notes and planning, and he would, everything was planned out before, whereas perhaps a more modern aspect is plan less and sort of, as we were talking about, search for more within the context. So it's interesting to think through those differences between a 20-page, 10-page short story, and is that really that different in structure and concept than a 200-page novel? I don't know. It's something I think about a lot.
Well, I think what you're talking about is a concept of writing in ambiguity. You start, you write, and then you see where it takes you. I believe, and maybe it's my own weakness, I believe that when you start a novel, you need to see it from the beginning to the end, with like, and then you simply cut out the plots and mold them and mold them and mold them. But unless you see the entire thing, and I've seen novels that are written in that ambiguity, and they just you can taste it, that at one point the writer got lost, changed his mind, turned around another way, went this way, had to rewrite the first chapter to fit this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it doesn't have to be a 500-page, 100 Years of Solitude. It could be as short and compact as, I don't know, I'm thinking Jewish literature that I really like Portnoy's Complaint. That's a great book that is thought out from the beginning to the end, and yet it doesn't feel extremely structured. It feels very like searching, let's see what happens. It's very light. But I know that he's a great writer, and this was done with tremendous skill, not because he was like trying out this, trying out that.
Yeah, that's an interesting, that might be a better way to frame it, sort of seeing through the vision behind the work and sort of how we get there. Okay, so maybe a novel, maybe not, but we'll see.
We'll see. I mean, and also you need a story.
That's true. Yes. Fundamentally, yes, I agree with
Life
you.
needs to throw you a story that's compelling enough to tell others.
Yeah, that's true, and to sustain over a long period of time and space, definitely. Okay, well, as we wrap up here, I was curious, where can people find the book and find you and keep up with everything that's going on?
Sure, the book is everywhere. It's on Amazon. It's at Barnes and Noble. It's sold by many many smaller bookstores. It can be purchased on the publisher's website, which is always a good thing to buy off the publisher. That way we can support the small presses that are trying to make a living. Yeah, I mean, if you go on Google, it's all over. And also I have a Facebook page and Instagram, so it's easy to find.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming on and speaking with me today. I know there was some technical difficulties on my end, so I appreciate you being flexible.
No, thank you. I'm thrilled that this happened, because I was kind of stalking you, because I saw your other interviews. There was a Dartmouth professor and there was a bestseller, and I was like, how do I get on that schedule?
I think people would be surprised by how easily contactable and in reach I am, so to speak. I don't think of myself as, I think there are people much more experienced where it's much harder to get through.
No, but you've interviewed some very impressive modern Jewish writers that I was watching, and I was like making notes on that some of them were talking about.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I really thank you very much for your flexibility, and I'm glad we could get this together in the end. Good luck with the book, is actually what I should say.